CEOs like to play a three-card Monte shell game. They want everyone to focus on their rhetoric about all the supposed wonderful things the company does, say creating a green-friendly product. And at the same time, when people aren't paying attention, they pull a fast one on us, or maybe a regular daily fast one, and they run their company using fear, sexism, and racism. And that pretty much sums up the world of Elon Musk. And that's what we're going to be talking about on the show today. This is Jonathan Tassini, and it's great to have you with us on our show for September 23rd, 2020. Our major sponsor is the American Postal Workers Union, which fights for dignity and respect for its 200,000 members and retirees and 2,000 private sector mail workers. And hey, this is our 200th show since we started the show as an audio podcast almost 4 years ago. So do two things for us today. The first thing is go over to YouTube and sign up for the video version of the show so we can begin to spread that show far and wide through the YouTube world and in general on video. And the second thing you can do is become a sponsor of the show. You can do that in two ways. You can go over to our website, workinglife.org, look for the link through our podcast tab to Patreon. And there you can become a sponsor either on a one-time basis or a regular monthly basis, or you can sign up for the show at ActBlue. Again, we've partnered up with ActBlue, and again, you can partner up with us as a sponsor of the show either on a one-time basis or on a monthly basis. Now, before we get to our guests, I wanted to quickly make one mention about my favorite topic, American exceptionalism, which is my favorite topic to debunk as often as possible. This is not an exceptional country at all, unless I guess you count the way in which the U.S. is exceptionally high in deaths from COVID-19. And for all of the bellowing of the lunatic in the White House about trying to outcompete China, he, and frankly a broad swath of politicians in both parties, are really looking pretty tiny and small when it comes to transforming the energy grid, which is the only way that we are going to save this planet. I caught this article in the most recent Economist magazine, which is about the transformation of the power grid from one based on fossil fuels to one based on other sources of power, mainly solar and wind. And now I'm quoting, China now produces more than 70% of the world's solar modules. It is home to nearly half its manufacturing capacity for wind turbines. That's the globe's manufacturing capacity. It dominates the supply chain for lithium-ion batteries, controlling 77% of cell capacity and 60% of component manufacturing, close quote. Now, to be sure, you have to note also that a lot of that production is done by essentially slave labor. China is not the Garden of Eden of workplaces. But my real point about highlighting this is to simply say China got to this point because it has a very clear industrial policy, and it subsidizes and supports that policy, which will allow it to dominate the world of green energy industries, meaning it just shows that a country with a coherent economic strategy, one that is fostered and encouraged with money from the public till, is essential. Not simply leaving the future of the planet to some dumb idea called the free market, where it's simply about how much money a billionaire can pocket and to hell with the people and the planet, which is basically the policy here, which just shows us that America is not an exceptional country. Now, one thing folks who have tuned into this show for a long time know about me, I'm not a big fan of CEOs. I don't think much of the ones I've met, and I think by and large they are mostly people with average intelligence and at best, average sets of moral principles. They mostly don't care about much beyond how much money they can make for themselves and shareholders and how much power they can amass, and to hell with the rest of the people. It especially galls me that any given CEO or owner of a company walks around with an impression that he, and it's mostly men in this society, that he and only he is responsible for the success of a company. That somehow a special genius or skill that a CEO has been endowed with leads to a company making money, which is complete bullshit. Number one, it's almost always true that it's the dozens or hundreds of thousands of workers, depending on the size of the company, that make or break a company. It's the hard work of average people. That's what makes a difference in a company. And you and I are just as responsible for the success of a company. Not because we buy the crap they produce. No, because no company makes a dime without the huge public investments that we all make with the taxes that we pay. We are the ones who pay for schools that educate future workers. We are the ones that pay for the bridges, the roads, the airports, the ports. We pay for every smidgen of public good that creates an environment where commerce takes place and companies make money. Which makes it even more galling to see the very rich CEOs and corporate overlords who made their fortunes because of our taxes and our hard work lead the charge against higher taxes on themselves, not to mention the charge against unions. It's pathetic, it's corrupt, and it's a great reason to have much, much higher taxes, including a hefty wealth tax. Frankly, I don't believe billionaires should exist. We should tax anyone above a certain level so heavily that they never attain the status of a billionaire. Because for every billionaire, there are thousands of people out there who can't afford to buy food or make ends meet. Which brings me actually to Elon Musk. Musk, as you may know, is the founder of Tesla. Before that, he co-founded and then sold PayPal, which made him a pile of dough, and now his mission is to bring to the world battery-operated vehicles. Now, even for a CEO, and this is saying a lot, Musk is arrogant and self-aggrandizing. Worse, he does not care about his workers a bit. He's anti-union in a vicious way and runs an operation that makes workers sick at sky-high rates, as I documented almost 2.5 years ago on this very podcast in episode 80, and you can check out that episode, as you can all our episodes, in our audio podcast archive at workinglife.org. And it appears pretty evident that he's also sexist and a racist. At least that's the way he lets the show run at his factories. He's facing one federal lawsuit claiming that in 2015 and 2016 at Tesla's factory in suburban Fremont, California, black workers were subjected to repeated racial epithets, racist cartoons, and that supervisors there engaged in or did little to stop the racism that was rampant throughout the factory. The same horrific environment is pretty apparent at the company's plant in Buffalo, New York, a factory that got almost $1 billion in taxpayer subsidies to open up shop, partly by playing on the fears of so many people in Buffalo who live in a city devastated over the past 25 years by crumbling heavy industry, which actually had offered many unionized, pretty decent paying jobs. Now, yesterday, a broad coalition of organizations took on Musk during the company's shareholder meeting on a whole range of issues of workplace abuse and corporate abuse. Of course, like everything these days, the shareholder meeting took place virtually, which insulates a CEO even more because it's even tougher to project protest and drive home an issue, frankly, over a computer screen. To understand the ugly nature of what it's like to work at the Tesla factory in Buffalo, I'm joined by two people. Sonny worked for Tesla until recently. Now, Sonny is not really his real name, and we've obscured his face in this discussion because he fears retribution from other potential future employers. Linnea Brett is a community organizer with the Clean Air Coalition, which develops grassroots leaders who organize their communities to run and win environmental justice and public health campaigns in Western New York. And so, Sonny, you have worked at Tesla in the past. You're no longer working there currently. Give us a sense, if you can, in short, what you saw in terms of the racism and also sexism, as I understand it, that you saw in your shift when you worked there during that period. And give us a couple of concrete examples.
Okay, so we will see something similar as to a young lady would come into work and she would be referred to as honey, doll, sweetheart. Um, to of course make any woman addressed like that by a guy in the workplace feel uncomfortable. We will see Caucasian workers violate policies and procedures, i.e., no phones on the floor, no eating on the floor. Um, and they would get away with it and they would use these things as the phones and frame or blackmail other coworkers, specifically black coworkers.
Hmm.
Um, like we had a one white coworker who I'll probably talk about later on in the segment, who actually I ended up having a situation with him. He took his phone out on the floor, recorded a black coworker doing something that he quote unquote wasn't supposed to be doing against policy and procedure, took it to a supervisor. They gave him an attaboy, good job, and asked him to continue to do this.
Hmm.
And we like, hey, having our phones out is against the rules and policies on the floor. Why is he privileged?
Mm.
Or is it truly a white privilege?
And as I understand it, the whole picture of racism starts almost in the allocation of the shifts, where you've got the overnight shift, the D shift, is predominantly people of color, whereas the A shift, which I guess is the more desirable shift at Tesla, is essentially white people. So that's already embedded in the way the factory operates, right? There's racism in the way work is allocated.
Correct. Okay, so it's broken up into four shifts. You have A, B, C, and D. The work schedule is A shift works Sunday morning, Monday, Tuesday, and every other Wednesday morning. B shift works every other Wednesday morning, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. C shift works the night shift as on A. So Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, and every other Wednesday. And then D shift works every other Wednesday, but Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights.
Hmm.
So it's the most unforgiving shift because you give up every weekend. Like it doesn't
Mm.
rotate. Like some jobs have a rotation, like you're here for 3, 6 months and then you rotate. Like, no, this is your shift. This is what you stuck with for the duration of the time that you're here.
Mm.
So you're giving up your weekends. Like if you have children who play sports, if you have any type of life outside of work, you're giving that up because you've given up every weekend. Like it doesn't exist unless you just collect and use your PTO or ask for personal time off without using your PTO if they use it at their discretion.
Mm.
But yeah, the D shift is more so the shift that they try to send. It's the dark side, is what it's been called to. It's been referred to as the zoo. It's been referred to as the east side. It's been referred to as the jungle. And it's majority Hispanics and blacks on that shift, rather you're male or female. The A shift is predominantly white. B shift and C shift, you have more of a mixture, but the A shift is predominantly the shift that everybody sees. It's the beginning of the week. Everybody will come in, even like the news, whatever, reporters, whoever. Everybody comes in during this time. So being there, it seems like, well, we have to paint a certain picture, a certain dynamic. And this is the dynamic that they chose. It's not a equal opportunity dynamic. It's more of a we all look alike dynamic. And everybody else who doesn't look like us, we just tuck them away on the back in the dark on the night end.
Hmm. And did you get a sense from when you were working there that this was coming from the very top? That I assume the supervisors and the managers were white, and therefore there was kind of like this general feeling on their part, hey, we can run this place like we want to, and therefore we can just express our racism and go after African Americans and people of color. And then, of course, there was a lot of sexism, as I understand it, from the EEOC complaints. Did you get a sense that there was kind of a coordination, or was it just racism that's inbred inside that management structure.
It's embedded. Like they hide it well in the beginning. Like
Mm-hmm.
they ask you, of course, when you go to a job, they ask you a wish list of jobs who have uh multiple shifts. Wish list. Oh, what shift would you like to work? They put out there real nicely. Oh, well, I like this shift, I like that shift, etc. And then once they present you with the offer of who you are, like they go through 5 applications and say, okay, we hired Sally, Jimmy, Billy, and Tony. So Sally says, oh, I like A shift. Billy, I like A shift. And then they would come to Tony and say, hey, Tony, we only have a certain amount of slots on every shift. And I see you want an A shift, but that shift is no longer available. So we're going to give you D shift because that's all we have.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony say, okay, well, cool. I want to be down with the company. I want to work. I want to earn a living. And then they'll go through another 5, Billy, Bev, Tommy, Joe. And they all say they want A shift, but A shift is now all of a sudden back open. But then they get to Ted or John and A shift is not open again no longer. It's
Mm.
oh no, nah, we only have D shift available to open. It's either you're gonna accept it or you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you get in there, it my original supervisor, he was intimidated by upper management. Like he was just more so, oh, this is what they told me to do, so this is what I gotta do. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like, why? And it was more like, listen, I like my job, I want to keep it. And it was either you do what I'm telling you to do or you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, but the other supervisors they don't. And he's like, well, the other supervisors don't look like me neither. And I'm like, well, you have a point there.
Mm.
And so it became a hidden type of thing until you got there. And once you got in it, you was able to see it and feel it almost immediately.
Hmm. And so now to Linnea, let me ask you sort of a broader question. I assume that what's happening at this plant, the racism that you see, the sexism that you have experienced and seen as an organizer, the backdrop of that is that there's not a union at the plant, and essentially folks are being abused. There's racism, there's sexism, there's discrimination in terms of shifts. How have you looked at this as an organizer in terms of that picture?
I think you're absolutely right that, in any workplace where there's not a union, you're not protected. You're inherently more vulnerable to the kind of abuse and discrimination that we see happening at Tesla. And I don't think it's any coincidence that, I started to get to know Tesla workers a couple of years ago through my organization. The Clean Air Coalition was in partnership with United Steelworkers on an organizing drive at the plant. And it was through those original organizing meetings that we started to get this picture of racially divided shifts, racially divided workloads, where workers of color not only are confined to the less desirable shifts, but even on those shifts are given more labor, more physically demanding and difficult labor, menial tasks that white workers aren't assigned. And so the racist patterns in the work assignments, in the culture, in the discipline, the sexual harassment, all of these things could be addressed with union protection for sure. And so without that, workers are inherently more vulnerable to this kind of abuse.
And what's incredible, perhaps not surprising, because this is the way corporations behave, out in the world, Elon Musk tries to project this very progressive view of the company. And what I mean by progressive is that the company's doing something new, innovative. Isn't this a great place to work? Aren't we a great company? But there's really an ugly side that the community often doesn't see because, number one, there isn't a union. Workers don't have a way of speaking out in a unified way. And on top of that, the taxpayers have given $959 million in a subsidy right out of taxpayers' pockets to this plant, in theory, for economic development. But this economic development is really coming at a high cost to the actual workers.
I think that you raise a really compelling point that the massive massive subsidy of $959 million into the facility does give us a really unique responsibility in holding Tesla accountable as residents of New York State and as the state itself, because with this huge influx of public money, we are complicit in what happens at Tesla in a particularly unique way. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes with a unique responsibility to intervene.
And one strategy that the coalition is using is to try to pressure shareholders in and producing a number of resolutions. And frankly, oftentimes shareholder actions are really about, I think, raising public consciousness, because the shares are usually controlled, frankly, by management. And I'm not denigrating this idea of trying to do this, but the reality is that shares are controlled by the CEO, and especially in a case like Elon Musk, where he controls the company, it's often difficult to get shareholder resolutions passed that are critical of the management and the ownership. But it's a great way of raising public consciousness. And so give us a sense of what your strategy is around these resolutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we could take credit for the strategy of the resolutions themselves, but those were actually generated by shareholder companies that invest in Tesla, who saw these issues from the work that we've done on the ground in elevating the worker stories. And so I found out about the proposals when they already existed. So was particularly energized by this, by how many people with real stake in the company are recognizing this kind of worker abuse as a problem and feeling really compelled and called to challenge that and to work to hold the company accountable and to help us shift the public narrative on what's really actually happening at Tesla and this disconnect between saving the planet and saving the world and replicating all of the dynamics of racism and white supremacy and sexism that frankly got us into this situation in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And so back to you, Sunny, to give a flavor of what's happening on the shop floor, if I can say that. There must be a real challenge to try to connect with people and get united opposition to the kind of abuse that folks are facing, the racism, the sexism, because number one, you don't have a union. And I guess what Tesla benefits from is basically sowing and producing an enormous amount of fear, right?
Yes, because it was a group of people who tried to band together from all shifts to try to bring in the union. And I don't know if you recall, back in January of 18, I believe it was, 1918, there was a mass trimming in the company, like across the board. And Giga 2, the Buffalo plant, they took that and they used that as a way of labeling all these individuals who wanted to bring in a union as troublemakers, as people who didn't want to really work, who didn't really want to be there, or any negative thing that you could think about a person and put them in that type of, in the workplace. And they fired those individuals, like individuals who was truly good workers, like hired workers, like came in and actually just did their job, really didn't, they mind their business, they spoke when spoken to, and they terminated those workers because they was trying to stand for something. And that's the culture. Just if you standing for something and not falling for anything there, then they're going to get rid of you. They're going to label you as confrontational. They're going to label you as not wanting to work, as lazy, as a slouch, etc. And 9 times out of 10 is the people of color who get labeled that way, who has to bite the bullet, who end up getting their head taken off in the gauntlet.
And that happened to you specifically, right? I remember in reading some of the materials before we started talking that there was one instance where you actually had suggested something and tried to get a change and raise a concern, and you were labeled as confrontational.
Yes. This was early when I first got there, just learning about the company and the incentives that the company said that they was given to those who bring innovative and creative ideas. They even have like suggested boxes and like put your thoughts and things here and submit them. And so my son in November of 18 had a football tournament in Virginia. And I'm like, oh, I can't get there because I just started in August, the time frame thing. I'm like, let me see if we could work something out.
Mm.
And so I asked the company, I said, first, hey, do we have a policy to where maybe I could switch days with another coworker on a different shift? Like I could switch days with Tony on C shift. Like I would work his Monday, Tuesday, and his Wednesday this week, and then he worked my Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Oh no, we don't do that here. Um, okay, is it a problem if we try to incorporate that here? Because I think that'll be valuable for everybody. Like everybody on any shift could use it. I don't know. We could talk about it and come back to it later in the town hall or something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then around like October of this year, I found a lot of people jumping shift. And I'm like, yo, why everybody leaving our shift? Like our shift was cool, even though it was mostly all black people. But I'm like, why everybody leaving our shift? And it came out that the shift differential was the same across the board.
Hmm.
And I'm like, how is that? Like we giving up our life. We were supposed to get the big, this is what I was sold on. And so they're like, nah, I'm going to the front end nights so I could still make the same money I'm making here and still have my weekends. And I'm like, that sound like a great idea. But then when I tried to do it, or a couple other people tried to do it, it became to, oh, you're not here long enough. Now the rules and the guidelines started to apply to certain individuals than it did to others. So I'm like, okay, um,
So white workers were given the flexibility and the ability to go around and do what they needed to do in terms of shifts, but non-white workers weren't.
yes. I mean, it was one or two of us who was able to slide through the crack, but we few far in between.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with a proposal. And I said, brought it to the plant manager, my supervisor, HR, and the plant manager. I said, hey, can we explore some of these options? Either increase the shift differential for D shift, um, rotate our weekend instead of rotating on a Wednesday, let's rotate a Saturday or let's rotate a Sunday. Or can we figure out another type of incentive to make people actually want to stay? I said, yo, within a month, we lost 10 people on our shift
Hmm.
to either jumping shift, going to C shift, making the same money, or people just saying, yo, you know what? I don't even want to deal with this at all and just quitting altogether because of the unfairness that they were seeing and witnessing.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask this question now, both of Sunny and of Linnea, and give you a chance to each answer this. What's striking to me about this whole situation right now is all of this is happening on the backdrop of this incredible uprising around the country against racism. You know, you've got these marchings in the street, the outpouring of tens of thousands of people against African Americans being murdered by police. You have these statues of racist individuals being pulled down. You know, these Confederate leaders who are now being removed, and there's really a awakening about the stain of racism in the country. Now, I don't want to overstate it because there's a lot of work to be done to eliminate that stain. But here you've got this company that is basically operating in this kind of context of like 100 years ago, where you can basically abuse people of color because you are in charge. White people are in charge of this company, and they can essentially abuse you. And it seems even more contradictory because of what's happening in the country. So, Sonny, do you get that sense, and is that even more striking to you and also your coworkers?
Yes, I even had this conversation with Linnea before, and I told her this recently. Like, I feel like I'm a modern day Emmett Till,
Mm.
looking back at what I went through with the company, and breaking it down and explaining it to her. The same individual that I spoke of earlier, they called him Superman. That's what his name was Steve. They called him Superman. Don't know why, but this individual, he traveled out to Reno for training to get trained on a new line that they brought to Giga Factory 2. My supervisor picked me to go over there to learn this training. I said, okay, that's fine. I'm willing to go learn. During this time, Steve, this was an electromagnetic area, like no cell phones, no nothing could be in this area because of the sensitivity of the equipment. And so the equipment went just like a normal thing. I always something down, the machine broke. And Steve pulls, I'm like, yo, bro, we're not supposed to have our phones out. What's going on? Oh, I don't know what's going on with this. I really wasn't trained on this machine like that. I don't know what this error message is. I'm just sending it to a tech. Okay, fine. While you're doing that, let me step off to the side and make a phone call. Go ahead. So I stepped out to the side. I made my phone call. I came back. I asked Steve, I said, hey, yo, listen, I got a piece of candy. Would you like a piece? Like, why we just sitting here not doing that? He was like, sure. Gave him a piece. I had a piece. Another coworker of mine had a piece. Everything was fine. Well, that picture that he took fried an $80,000 circuit board. They brought it to his attention like, hey, you know what? This circuit board got fried. How did it happen? Because you're the trainer over there. You had 2 trainees. I don't know. He said, Sonny was on his phone. He probably did it. Mm-hmm. So when I came into work the next day, my supervisor addressed me about the situation, like upset. And I said, hold on, time out. Like, I'm a stand-up kind of guy. At least I think I am. Like, I shoot from the hip. If I did something, I'll tell you, yes, I did it, or no, I didn't do it, regardless of the consequences, repercussions. And so he said, you burnt out an $80,000 circuit board. Steve said that you did it. And I said, huh? So we had our little back and forth, and I let it go. I just wanted to work. I see Steve in the hallway, and I looked at him in my head and discussed, like, why would you lie on me? After that, Steve approached my supervisor and said that I intimidated him. He felt threatened by me. And I'm like, why now? Because yesterday when he was working with me, you didn't feel threatened by me. I wasn't intimidating. Now that I learned that you just lied about me, you feel threatened and intimidated by me and by my presence. The job did an investigation behind the burning of the circuit board, found out that Steve was the one who actually burned out the circuit board, but still reprimanded me as being not. They said I gave Steve a non-verbal threatening action, whatever that meant. Like, I gave Steve a non-verbal threatening action, and I was placed on the final written warning. And so I'm like, this guy just lied on me. This white guy just lied on me, and essentially put my livelihood in jeopardy, which ultimately led to my demise, because I'm currently not with the company anymore. But it wasn't that particular, but that led up to it, because now in everybody's eyes, I am threatened, I am intimidating, I am, you know what I mean? I am somebody to be fearful of. And at that point, I was just like, I can't take it. So they used one of my vacation days that I was requested, that I was granted permission of, and said that I abandoned my job. And I did a no call, no show. And they terminated me that way.
And the way they operate, by the way, that not only is targeting you, but that also sends a signal to people that are watching, who are trying to organize certainly a union or stand up for themselves or collectively. Hey, don't step out of line because we'll go after you. So that's kind of a way in which folks are targeted and divided and conquered. And Linnea, did you have a sense of how that played out, either in that circumstance, or if you want to react to the general point I made about, here we are confronting racism, and yet you've got this plantation essentially where these white supervisors and white CEOs and white managers are operating in a completely racist, and we didn't talk as much about sexism, but certainly in a way in which people are discriminated against.
Absolutely. I think there's clear parallels and connections between the work that Tesla workers are leading to hold the company accountable and the work that's happening in the streets in all around the country. I think we're seeing in both instances that this culture of racism and culture of white supremacy, and specifically this fear that whiteness cultivates of Black men specifically, and the way that we target and demonize Black men and paint them as threatening and someone to be afraid of, we see that has consequences in countless ways in the lives of Black folks and in Black communities, from instances of violence and murder and brutality interacting with law enforcement, and then also ways in which Black men are punished, targeted, and scapegoated in the workplace. Those are both relying on our cultural fear of Blackness and on anti-Blackness specifically. Those are really clearly related.
And I would add one other aspect to this, the fear that these racist managers are able to instill. I guess there's a lot of ways in which they can do this, and they have power because it's Buffalo. And what I mean by this is because of the way in which that city has been affected in terms of job loss, the loss of industrial jobs, there's a tremendous amount of fear on the part of people to stand up. And there's this sense of, oh, we have to be so nice to these companies that are coming and giving us these jobs. We should be so grateful. We're going to give them, hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money. We don't really care, and we don't want to actually pay attention to the fact that they're also being racist and sexist. Do you get a sense of that dynamic too?
Absolutely. I mean, the decision in the first place to give $959 million to a multi-billionaire absolutely is a choice as a result of that fear. And then, yes, we see that in the way that this plays out on the ground, and specifically around the ways in which racism has been used as a tool for centuries by people in power, from, the elite multi-billionaire class like Elon Musk to the manager class in workplaces, by sowing fear and division and pitting workers against each other so that white workers feel they have more in common with Elon Musk than their Black coworkers, and thus are willing to engage in this kind of bullying and harassment and racism. It's absolutely, it's specific to Buffalo, and it's not. It's the story we see play out all over the country, but the economic history of Buffalo is certainly a part of the story.
Well, I want to thank you both for standing up to the company and trying to organize opposition, and we'll keep following this story as it unfolds, as you take on Tesla and try to instill some sort of justice and equity in that company. And we'll have you back on the show. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That'll do it for this week's show. Thanks to our guests, Sunny and Linnea Brett, who told us about the racism at Tesla. Our editor, as usual, is David Hebden. Our major sponsors, the American Postal Workers Union. On the occasion of our 200th broadcast, please do two things for us. First, go over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel there, The Working Life Broadcast with Jonathan Tassini. Second, please do become a sponsor of the show. You can do that in two ways. You can go over to workinglife.org, click on the podcast tab, and find your way over to Patreon, and you can become a sponsor of the show either on a one-time basis or a regular monthly basis, or you can do that over at ActBlue. Since we partnered up with ActBlue, go over to ActBlue, become a sponsor either on a regular basis or on a one-time basis. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to having you back next week.